Welcome to Talking Insights. I'm your host, Antonio, and today we'll explore the intersection between sustainability and finance. Our guests, Lester and Bea, prepared a study that examines how banks in the Philippines, Singapore, and Australia are embracing sustainability and its impact on the world. From debunking myths about greenwashing to revealing the challenges and triumphs of sustainable banking, we'll talk about what could shape the future of finance. So, welcome, Bay and Lester. Thank you for being here. It's really interesting the paper that you're presenting on sustainability and how it touches the banking system. I wanted to with you a bit more about that. And I was gonna ask you to share a bit about your backgrounds and why did you came to focus on sustainability in banking and this topic in specific.
So, a little bit about me. I have been a market researcher for close to 20 years now. And I've gone agency side as well as client side. I spent quite a number of years in fast moving consumer goods. And in the end of 2021, I started working for the Bank of the Philippine Islands. So I'm new to banking, and it has been very eye opening and very inspiring to be able to work on something that affects people so significantly. Their money or the money that is available to them. But sustainability has been close to my heart for longer than that. I mean, in packaged goods, we talk about it, right? And it's something that resonated with me, and that's why when this opportunity came up to work on this with Lester, it was a really like exciting thing.
Thank you, Bea. For me, I've been with the industry for maybe a little bit longer than that. As you can see, Bea is younger, fresher ideas than me. I've been in the industry for about 25 years. I'm celebrating my 25th year this year, starting from that internship, um, eons ago in the Philippines. And I'm now based in Singapore after moving around the region for several agencies now. And why the banks? It's because I've been looking at sustainability and trying to anchor it on a category or an industry or a vertical market that has both B2B and B2C. And I wanted it to be different. I know that there's a lot of media hype in terms of the consumer, but nothing has been said or probably put out there at the Esomar sort of venue. The level of understanding of how B2B and B2C could be married together and then looked at attacking or approaching a very relevant topic, which is sustainability.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons that I selected this paper to talk on this podcast specifically is so we started creating the Esomar Climate Pledge. And when I was looking into your paper and preparing this interview, I felt like it's really interesting that some areas of work don't touch so much on sustainability as others. And it was interesting to understand like how banking can improve and how they can integrate sustainability into their business models and stuff like the day-to-day work. I wanted to ask you a bit more about that. Like, how can banks integrate sustainability into their day-to-day or their business models?
Yeah, Bea lives by it day by day, and she's the best person to talk about it.
Well, Antonio, I just googled the SMR climate pledge just now. It's super easy to digest actually, and it's similar to a lot of the things that the Bank of the Philippine Islands is doing, from like responsible banking operations, meaning what we provide to clients, and also responsible operations within the organization, meaning the way we run our uh, operations on the daily, from the buildings that we build or use to the paper that we choose not to use, how we get our trash collected, etc. And it's being, I would say, consistent with what you stand for. I mean, if you want to stand for sustainability, it's not just about going to the ratings agencies or winning awards for it, but really walking the talk, not just in everything, in all the ways that you do business, and even in employee with employees, call for sustainability is strong and consistent. So 10% of our goals every year is towards sustainability, whether that is something that we develop in our course of work, or, for example, volunteering for financial literacy and inclusion. Of course, everyone has a stake in it with 10%, right? That's quite a significant proportion. So, yeah.
And what do you think are the biggest challenge face the banks are facing nowadays when they are trying to turn into a more sustainable practice? Do you think it's more on the day-to-day stuff or in the long-term business plan and I don't know, changing like a big vision of their operations? Do you think it's like the smaller day-to-day or like the bigger ones?
I would say the smaller day to day, just because setting a big goal and communicating that is easy, right? It's so far away, but making sure that you move consistently towards that in even the little things that you do so that you're set up for success to achieving that far away big goal. That's what's challenging. And especially when other things come about that are in contrast to that, right? So, for example, like you want to do zero emissions, but switching to renewable energy is expensive. Will hit your expenses, your operating expenses, and it's challenging that way. But you have to make the tough decisions, right? To make sure that someday is possible, is more successful, which is, of course, what sustainability means anyway. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that at the end of the day, and I think this happens to every company, right? Like when they are trying to create like the sustainable initiatives or the sustainable practice, money is always an issue, even for banking, which is kind of interesting. But I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it goes both ways, right? Do you have so? How can banks or banking institutions measure the impact of these initiatives? Do you have any suggestions, or are you already? I guess your paper kind of talks about it, right?
Yes.
So we are always guided by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And in our integrated report, we itemize everything that we've accomplished against each of those goals. I think it keeps us, honest in terms of there's a long way to go, but we have done and accomplished a lot also already. And it's good to remind ourselves what we want to do towards sustainability, that hey, all of these efforts are towards these SDG. I think not just for the clients or the shareholders, but even for us who actually delivered that work. That means a lot in reminding that this is really something that is a priority for the bank.
Yeah, so those are actually very good points, and we do have the voice of the banking industry from Bea, but we also have seen comparisons of or levels of activities of the banks outside of the Philippines, and we touch it on in our paper, looking at Singapore, for example, or Australia, and it's really is a cradle to grave analysis, so to speak, and that's why Bea was mentioning about the day to day retail banking approach, but also looking at the employees down to the utilization of energy within the company. What's interesting, if we look at the other banks, is the B2B endeavors, wherein we look at discrepancies of what the B2C is talking about to what they're actually funding. And that's the major thing that we've discovered in our paper. As we went through this journey, we thought that we're not going to be strong advocates or hardliners, so to speak. But when we saw the facts, and with these approaches that we saw, and it has to be, a total system of a bank, because bank doesn't only act as a retail arm, but also funding companies. We saw that there are levels of exposure in terms of fundings for the coal mining, which is a number one source of pollutant, or the source of climate change that we're experiencing at the moment. So that is an example of how it can be sort of unified, and the work to do is there, and the call to action is right in there.
And so, do you think in some cases, some of the initiatives or some of the things that, or some of the projects even that some of the banking institutions are advocating or funding or something like that, could almost as seen as kind of a greenwashing? So they're like saying as like, well, we're so green, we're helping everything, and then at the end of the day we're funding, or not even funding, but sometimes just partnering with some other institutions that are not seen as so green, like, I don't know, the oil industry and stuff like that. I know that like all these industries at the end of the day they all need banks, but I guess that some have like closer links than others. Do you think this can see as almost a greenwashing to the consumers?
Okay, let me answer first, and then perhaps if you could just add from perspective. The way we see it is basically a integration, everything, and a balancing. We can't really, I think, go back to the ways of working or the ways of living before. We really have to, put out there some carbon emissions to be able to go about our day-to-day activities, and even the globe or the world as a business. It has to move. And we realized during the pandemic that the slowing down of that, because there's not much activity, also contributed to a lesser carbon emission. But at the same time, we were not behaving like normal. So we accept all those facts, and the term greenwashing could be a hard term, but it's the way to go when you want to impose change. And the way we want to approach this is a phase out mechanism. The funding can be done within a certain period of time, because you can't have a full stop. Except, for example, when we saw it in Australia, then they have full stop this year, which is fantastic, because they've been working towards it for years, or several decades now. In other countries, for example, in Singapore, we still see that the major bank here, DBS, which is under our study, um, does not have a clear phase out policy yet, talking about strongly about sustainability on the retail. So we see a disconnect, because the other one keeps on burning wood, while the other one types
Is basically saving on wood. And so that, you know, by logic, we could say greenwashing. Um, and that's the term that we use because we want to have a stronger word to make this call to action work. Maybe Bea has some opinion about it too.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on the consumer side of it. If we talk about greenwashing, I mean nowadays consumers are so woke, right? They're aware of these things. They don't just unlike before, maybe when they'll just say they'll just believe everything an institution would say. Nowadays, they're armed with information, or the sources of information. They easy to Google, or look into things like fact checking, right? And that way, I think banks really and other institutions have to be a lot more careful, because it's a two-way thing. On one hand, people get inspired when some big institution like a bank would say they're supporting sustainability, when a bank would lead educational campaigns about sustainability to consumers. They believe that they like it, it even influences their choice of bank. But at the same time, they're quick to spot if it's inauthentic. Some are quick to accuse banks of greenwashing. So I think that way, consumers keep us honest. I mean, we have to be honest, but consumers keep us even more honest.
And do you see consumers in different types of banks? I mean, obviously, your paper is focused on a region of the world, but this is a practice that it happens on a bunch of other countries and a bunch of other banking institutions. Do you see consumers almost dropping out of, or stopping being consumers, being customers of a said banking institution because they spot that greenwashing, because they spot those practices are not as real as they were announced, let's say?
We we don't have the data for that, I believe, but what I can say is there's a lot of choice out there, whether it's a bank or it's a fintech, an e-wallet even here in the Philippines already gives them a lot of options in terms of the financial services they can avail. So they'll be quick to switch if they find even something, like fishy about it. It's easy for them to switch. So yeah, so it's really, that keeping that integrity is so important.
And then more so, I think, for the banking category, because number one attribute of this category of this market is trust. Because basically they are keeping your money. For most of Asia, it's a hard-earned money. So there's a lot of trust, and that trust actually should be really tight, almost like airtight between the consumer and the bank. Yes, we don't have clear data for it, but we know that that relationship could switch if and when that trust is broken.
No, yeah, I agree. I mean, I want to trust the institution with my money, and everything else. Like, I want to trust them to be clear and 100% on everything that they say. So, because if I, if they don't, if I understand that they're not doing something correctly, I think that eventually will affect something down the line, or let's say my pockets or something like that. So, yeah, I don't. I can see that changing. We could keep talking for hours and hours about this. Like, I had so many questions about the digital wallets and the whole the change, how the banking industry can change, and how we see the future. And obviously, we can talk about like the utopias and the regulations utopically, how we can see the future. But I have had one more question regarding kind of that, about like almost like a global standard that in the future could, or it should be, like almost a global standard for sustainability, in global scale of all the banking institutions.
Yeah, I think the reason why we have the title or the headliner of our paper, um, currency, is that it is changing the way people do transactions, not only in terms of the banks, but also beyond the banking industry. There are, credits to be had for doing well, or for doing the pledge. And so this is really becoming like a currency. Of course, not to the level of the monetary value that you are seeing now between the governments or markets. But this is something that is a bloodline that cuts across categories and markets. Now, in the future, yes, the state of play will be different. People will be choosing who they are going to deal with in terms of, money, or in terms of business transactions. And I think we see sustainability as high up there as one of the most important criteria, sorry, in terms of doing the business transaction.
And regarding having some type of, again, the standards that I'm kind of meaning is mostly regarding like, the stuff that you can invest, that the banking can propose that they'll invest or partner with. Do you think eventually in the future we can reach to a point where there's going to be like a global, I don't want to call it laws, but you know what I mean, like almost like laws that banks can and cannot do?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that in the EU. We're already seeing that it's not just an audit report, but it's part of uh, the licenses. So you are given a license to operate if you have a sustainability stand or allegiance to a particular standard. And the way I think now the banking industry operates, and also Bea mentioned it earlier, is the model of ESG. And some banks can go beyond that. There's ESG squared for BPI, which is maybe a more hype version because they really keep it close to their chest. And for me, that is a form of a guideline. It could evolve as we see more integration of B2B, B2C, and other consumer undertakings.
I think for me, from the perspective of a local bank, the world is so small now, right? With the internet and all the shared consciousness, I would say. I mean, local banks like us, we want to play in the big leagues as well. So, on one hand, you can think of, oh, I mean, very country specific, the way um, central banks regulate the banks in their country or the financial services in their country. But at the same time, institutions want to be world class and they all see best practices that other banks in other countries, what they do. And we always want to be better. So we want to copy that, want to use that as inspiration. So really, even if I'd say there's no formal guidelines on maybe global rules, but inevitably that's where probably things would end up just because you don't want to be left behind as well.
Yeah, and probably like shake a bit of the industry at some point, like even smaller banking institutions can have better regulations or better initiatives, and that will eventually shake a bit of the industry, I think. But well, it was really helpful and really insightful, this conversation. Again, I could talk this for hours. It's really interesting to have, when we talk about sustainability and climate and the climate change and everything, I think we always connect to some point and to some areas. Like we always think about the forests and we think about NGOs and stuff like that. But then there's so many areas of that also touch about and could also improve their practices and the way that they go day by day and even the future. And the banking for me, it's one of them. Like I know so little about some of the practices, and it's so insightful to have this conversation. So thank you so much for this conversation, B and Lester.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a great
Bye.
day.
And that's all for today. In just a couple of days, we'll be heading to the legendary city of Athens for the Esomar Congress, where you can watch Lester's and Bea talk, as well as some other insightful keynotes. If you don't yet have your ticket, make sure to follow the links in the description to get yours now. Don't miss out. And as always, thank you for listening and watching. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media. See you next time.